What's going on, GBA fans? My name is Berk, and today we'll be bringing you the Week 6 power rankings for the GBA Season 6, and like always, except for that 1 week, I'm here with Trav.
Hey everyone, good to be back again.
Kinda, I guess. By the end of the season, it's gonna go from us actually being friends to just showing complete contempt for each other. It's gonna be like,
shit.
Alright, and I'm back with some asshole again. Let's go straight into the power rankings. So at my number 16, your number 15, we have the San Jose Sharpedos. Now, Tom's prep was much better than it was last week, and he planned very well around the Wobbuffet. I know during planning, it was one of the things he was most worried about. He had a good amount of momentum in the early game, but all of that was just completely lost when he decided to protect on the Gorbis. Now, I know he said he wanted more toxic damage, but when you have to make really big plays and you're looking at a very big threat, such as something at +2 that can possibly baton pass, you have to think about what is the worst possible scenario that could possibly happen. And the worst possible scenario was he goes into Gyarados and I don't hit it with anything, and therefore my priority won't be able to kill it. That's the worst possible scenario. So you have to play to damage control, because at that point, things are looking bad, because you're staring at a +2, +2, +2 Gorbis that can possibly smash pass. And I know he was thinking, well, he thought he was just going to go for Hydro Pump, but still, if it went for Hydro Pump, you could possibly tank one because Gorbis isn't the strongest. Yeah, you might lose your Sylveon, but that's obviously a much better scenario than just being entirely swept. But it's like when you're in on something that you know can kill you, but you don't want that thing setting up a sub, so you stay in anyway and you keep attacking it until it kills you. You stay in and you just keep attacking until something kills your Sylveon, because you're like, I am not letting anything just get a free +2, +2, +2. And unfortunately that's what happened, and then, sweep happens. I still like every week, he's got a really great attitude about everything. I know he's at number 16, but I see him being able to pick up more wins in the future. I know he's very busy, but he's planning, and he, having a good attitude really helps week to week, because we've seen some teams in the past who have a losing record and they just kind of stop giving a shit, and Tom won't do that.
I actually really, really liked Tom's prep this week. I thought he had a lot of things to deal with MV's threats really well. And I mean, he brought Ebel and Copelion. That's like the greatest set of all time.
It wasn't against Mono, though.
Yeah, if he brought that against Mono, that just would have been a forfeit. But, he played okay around the Jirachi. Like, it was a pretty big problem for his team, and he was able to pursuit trap it. I mean, the main thing is there was just that one play that shifted the entire game. And up until then, Tom was doing really, really well. It was a back and forth. Both teams still had options to win. And then MV did what MV does best. MV said his plan was originally to go into the Ampharos to take a Hyper Voice, and that was because he didn't expect the Quick Attack. So that is when, I haven't done the calcs, but I'm fairly sure a non-bulk invested Ampharos would have died to the combination of a Pixie Plate Hyper Voice plus super effective Quick Attack. But it would have made it an interesting game, rather than at that point just bang, game over.
At my number 15 and your number 16, we have the Milwaukee Sawsbucks, so you can take Battler X.
Battler X was his usual creative self with Drain Punch Slowbro, which I honestly never thought I'd see. I mean, it makes sense, which is strange. I like the fact that he brought Meloetta Pirouette, because we don't see it very often, and it's actually a pretty huge threat. It's crazy fast. 128 attack, I think, and then powerful dual stab. And it gave him a way to bait in the Registeel and take it out, which paved the way for Mega Pinsir. And that happened during the game. The only problem is he let Miguel win the Hazard War and had to sack his Sand Slash to Talonflame. He basically needed that Sand Slash to spin away rocks. Miguel kept his rocks up, and Mega Pinsir took a huge chunk of damage just from that. It also meant he couldn't keep his rocks up. I mean, that was on the Heatran, but nonetheless, he couldn't keep his rocks up to prevent Talonflame from switching it again. The Quick Attack on Meloetta would have been useful to put Talonflame in range to die from Brave Bird recoil. Unfortunately, because he decided to preserve the Meloetta rather than go for that Quick Attack and get the chip damage, Talonflame was able to be kept around as a late game win con, provided, it would have died to Fate anyway, but it just was around as an extra threat. I like his offensive checks this game, and he brought, for some reason, 4 berries, I think, but he didn't really have reliable bulk. Mainly, you want to use a berry to bait a hit and then OHKO the threat that you're facing. You don't want berries to take a hit and then just get rocks up unless you've got a suicide lead and you're planning to sweep straight after that.
Yeah, so you pretty much said anything, but one thing I want to point out is I really like how Battle Rex was scouting around a lot of Miguel's mons. Like, he wanted to scout out to see if Gudra had Earthquake by switching in the Heatran, then switching in the Mega Pinsir, and then he burned the Shuka Berry anyway. Like, I didn't really understand, like, where was the thought process there? You scout to make sure to see if it has EQ, and it does, which was great, but then wouldn't you then say, okay, I gotta preserve the Shuka Berry so I can't bring in the Heatran, instead of just burning it to get a Brox? But he recognized in team planning that Weavile just kind of fucks up his team. It does, but you do have a Heatran, which does deal decently well with Weavile. I get Weavile gets something like low kick, but that's kind of thing, what berry do you run on it? I like the Sand Slash set. Super Fang, he realizes Miguel's walls also don't have reliable recovery, and so you can use Super Fang to whittle them down really well. I know we said about the berries, but if you switch in something that is weak to the other mon, one of their stabs, one of the very strong stabs, like when you switch in Slowbro on a Weavile, you just broadcast that you have Color Berry. You absolutely broadcast it. Like, there's there shouldn't be any doubt in anyone's mind. You have Color Berry. So at that point, if you're broadcasting it, know your opponent's going to make some sort of switch, make some prediction around that. So at number 14, we have the Newcastle United, and Sam picked up his first win this week. It was really solid planning, nothing too out there. I like the fact that he had Roselli, Berry, Crocodile to help deal with his kind of weakness to Fairy for his team. This isn't a criticism of Sam, but I just feel like I see Colberberry run on Mew like 9 out of 10 times. I get the knockoff weakness, but still, it's always Colberberry Mew. He realized Electros could be used so well for momentum because, you know, Geo didn't have any ground types this week, and he just kept bringing it in any time he could to get a Volt Switch off. And that's what Electros does best. It is a very bulky pivot. He got caught off guard by the Specs Cresselia, but at the same time he realized, well, that's actually now a big threat gone from Geo's team because he didn't have to worry about, you know, stupid bulky stall Cresselia, and he was able to dispatch it really easy because he had to switch into Specs Cresselia because Specs Cresselia doesn't really hit that hard. He really scouted out sets, you know, especially around the Entei. He's making sure, is this banded, is this not banded? What possible moves does it have? Like around the Zapdos, he wanted to see what moves it had, and once he realized that it only had Volt Switch as an attacking move, you know, it becomes a free switch into Crocodile. And he used Rock Spell to get momentum, you know, bait in the Zapdos to go for Defog, then bring in Electros on the Defog, and then Volt Switch back on out. So it's that kind of baiting in the Defog to get momentum for yourself. He played very well around Geo's offense. This is a much different play than we've seen the past weeks, and it's much different planning than we've seen the last weeks. And it's much better. If Sam keeps this up, I think he's going to turn his season around.
We all know Sam is like an absolutely fantastic battler. You know, he won the first D-League, did really well in the PPL last season. And so I think the slight changes he's made to his team building and the fact that he got a win this week against a pretty good opponent is showing that he can be that battler again. You know, even though it's a different draft, it might not suit him as well. Never Melt Ice instead of Life Orb on Kyurem was definitely the better option. I'm not sure if he even clicked Ice Beam, but not taking that Life Orb recoil and still being able to fire off big hits really, really helped out that Kyurem because its bulk meant it could stay around and take hits from things like the Entei, things like the Absol, and just destroy everything. One thing I thought was actually really, really good was preserving the Mew until right at the end of the game. Not bringing it out and not revealing any item, any moves. It just meant that Geo, towards the end game, was completely paranoid about, is it Scarfed Mew, is it Colberry, can I set up, etc., which prevented him from setting up and kind of helped Sam win. He was still a little bit underprepared for Grand Ball because he expected a defensive one. But even though he knew it was going to be coming and knew he had a big fairy weakness on his team, he sort of made the mistake of assuming that Grand Ball is going to be defensive.
My number 13, your number 12. We have the New Orleans Pelipers. So, talk about John.
Never bring Shiny Miltank again.
It's beautiful.
It's disgusting. It's just like this fat blue cow. And anyway.
Wow.
After the Rotom had tricked Gastrodon into Toxic, he straight away goes for Toxic again. And I don't really see why, because Dan has no reason not to go into Ferrothorn on that. And that's when you need to make a prediction and go into something else that can deal with Ferrothorn, because that Ferrothorn ended up being a pretty big problem for his team. He did make the smart plays switching in Gastrodon on a predicted knockoff to get rid of the Scarf again, and then he got a couple of little bits of bad luck, like things like the Toxic Mist on Gastrodon, which just amplified the fact that he misplayed around all of that section and gave down a lot of momentum. And then there is one of the weirdest sections of play I've ever seen, where there's a Cryogonal going for Ice Beam, and it doesn't do as much as he expects to this Ferrothorn, because it doesn't have special attack investment, because he forgot to check the Mons that he got from the Jenna. John, check your Mons. Everyone, just check your Mons. As soon as you get them, just go through and check that everything is right, because people make mistakes, and you don't want it costing you a game at some point. Towards the end game, I think John misidentified his win condition, because Landorus at that point, if it switches in on Victini and gets the Intimidate, then V-Create can't kill. It also could basically kill the rest of Dan's team with the Gravity Earthquake, which was a really, really smart bring.
John is not making as many predictions as I think he should be. You know, like you said with the Toxic on the Ferrothorn, you know, there's no predictions there. And what happens when you don't even make even safe predictions, he loses a lot of momentum. The match was kind of spiraling out of his control until Cryogonal kind of did some stuff and it was misgenned, and you need to check your Mons. Absolutely. I feel like this has been somewhat of a problem this season, is, you know, a different coach each week. Oh, I didn't check my Mons, and it has this instead of this, or these EVs that it shouldn't have. And you just need to check that. That's something that is that's on the coach, to make sure that everything that was given to him was right. And he definitely needed that Lando more, but I think he's having some problems in the late game trying to identify what he actually needs to win the game. It definitely wasn't Reuniclus. At my number 12 and your number 11, I have the Borussia Donphan. Really solid playing by Lars this week. I think he's really starting to get used to how his team works, because I feel like the first several weeks he's been kind of struggling how to plan with his team. And this week, I feel like he's really getting to the swing of how his team works together as a unit. He played well in the early game around Simisage and Latias. You know, Vaporeon is so damn fat, and, you know, Simisage is Simisage, so you don't really have to play around it that much, because let's be real, it's kind of bad. You know, some plays lost him a bunch of momentum, you know, like taking the HP fire, but, you know, that's stuff he can't predict, and he got caught off guard by those things, and it lost him a ton of momentum. But again, I'm saying now, he could not predict the HP fire. Definitely, though, Lars needs to keep track of how much HP his Mons have. I know Cooper does this a lot, where he will write down all the HPs his Mon has at any given point in time. That's very important, because it allows you to do calc. He did a lot of scouting where the Nidoqueen made sure it wasn't Pasho Berry, but then when Nidoqueen's in again, he's really trying to make a lot of predictions around it, which, again, you gotta look at the threat that it is. I know Melodic was a switch-in, a very easy switch-in. Was Melodic a bigger threat to come in than the Nidoqueen, dealing a lot of damage? And, you know, what happens if George makes a balls-to-the-wall prediction and expects you not to go for an Aqua Jet or something, and then, you know, kills your Crawdon? Like, he needed chip damage on that thing. Like, that's pretty much the only way you take down Nidoqueen, is by getting chip damage. And once you saw that didn't have Pasho Berry and it wasn't Life Orb, then the most likely scenario was Shuka Berry to take it from the Landorus, so you needed the chip damage to make sure that that thing can't take an Earth Power. And then at the end, you know, it just came down to a damage roll and lost it, but, you know, that happens. That happens. If you put yourself in a position where it's going to come down to a 50-50, there's a 50% chance you're going to lose it, and in this week he did. And he really should have tried to play some mind games with Stealth Rock at the end, because at the very least, if George is not making any predictions at the end, which I'm pretty sure George would, you could stall him out of Sucker Punches. I think Lars played very well. He did make some definite misplays, but then he also made some really good plays throughout the match. His planning was much more solid than, you know, the first few weeks. So, it was a very good match.
I don't have anything much to add. I mean, just going to reiterate, if there is a 1% chance of you winning Sucker Punch Mind Games, you take it, because if you don't, you just lose. Yeah, he made some really good plays, and sometimes got absolutely played in the mid-game, and that's just, you know, that's how League format works. It was a really even back-and-forth match, and in the end he basically lost to a 50-50 to a good opponent. And it happens, there are some things he could have done better to guarantee the win, but ultimately, if he is that competitive with George consistently, then he'll pick up more wins this season.
My number 11 and your number 13, we have the New York Metapods. So you can talk about Dan.
I have Dan a fair bit lower than you, partly because he almost threw the game at one point because of the whole weird cryogonal thing. He changed his prep a lot this week, and it paid off for him. There was a lot more offense and a lot more momentum-gaining mons, and I really like that, rather than the straight-up bulk that we've seen him bring previously. And part of that is I think his bulk didn't stand up to John's team. I like that he identified that and changed his prep. He got a lot of momentum early because of tricking the Gastrodon with his Rotom, and then Gastrodon missing the Toxic, meaning Rotom stays perfectly healthy. He can just go into Ferrothorn and start doing his thing. The Ferrothorn set was really, really smart because it was able to actually break through John's defensive core. I think definitely being more relaxed helped him out, just with thought processes in-game and with planning and that kind of thing, not worrying about is everything 100% right and just going with his gut a bit more and just being relaxed about the outcome of GBA matches, I think is going to be a good change for him. He basically, he had all his momentum and then goes into Gorgeist to try and kill with a Shadow Sneak. He could have just killed it with the Hitmontop. I get he didn't want to bait certain things in it, but you have a Technician Hitmontop with Mach Punch. It will destroy any Cryogonal. Like, even Choppleberry Cryogonal would take a lot of damage from that. The endgame worked out in his favour, but it did come down to whether or not Lopunny had Quick Attack. And another thing is, it's nice to see the round 1 pick Mega Altaria just being complete death fodder.
Dan does so much better with defensive Megas than offensive Megas. Mega Sableye he used really well. Mega Aggron he used fantastic. And when he uses Mega Altaria defensively, it's actually used well. But there's something about like offensive Megas for him. I really like the dual Trick Scarfers, but I think he thought that the Trick Scarf Rotom was really well hidden when he brought it in on a Gastrodon. You know, his thought process is, well, he's going to think I'm going for a Will-Wisp against the Gastrodon. It's like, or maybe a Toxic. You've got a Gourgeist. Like, there would be no reason to bring in the Rotom on a Gastrodon when you have a Gourgeist. So I think, and it was pretty broadcasted out there, yeah, I'm probably Trick Scarf, and I will trick you. Because that's the best way to deal with Gastrodon, is to be able to trick it a Scarf, because then it's slow, then it's like, it's got that fabulous Scarf, and it's not going any faster, really, because it's slow.
It's literally a snail.
It's a slug?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you better be. Some questionable places you mentioned, you know, the Hitmontop. Like, that's the thing. Like, you know how big of a misplay it was because he brought in the Hitmontop anyway the next turn. And I think, like, he does a lot of calcs, but at that point he didn't calc to see how much damage the knockoff should have done. Cryogonal does not have good defense, I'm pretty sure. He was also caught off guard by Gravity Landorus, which normally I would say, how can you really... You're never really going to predict Gravity Landorus, but you can predict Gravity Landorus from John because John's used it before. John has brought, like, Smackdown or Gravity, like, almost every time he's brought Landorus. I think he definitely needs to scout out what his opponents like to bring on their sets. And I like that, at least, you know, he recognizes his misplays, and then he tries to correct them later, and still go through making the best plays, keeping calm, not trying to play on tilt, and still go through and make the best possible plays. So, this was definitely a much better week than past weeks. So, at my number 10 and your number 8, we have the Real Marill. Miguel, this week, I think he played well. He realized Ice Dark coverage kind of fucks up Battle-Rex's entire team, so he brought Weavile, and then he has Blastoise with Dark Pulse and Ice Beam, so, you know, he recognized that those were probably going to be his win conditions, and then in the match, those were his win conditions. And he used Talonflame very well. He made sure to get the rocks away for Talonflame. Like, he switched out at Talonflame 3%, something like that, and then made sure to spin away rocks to be able to bring it in for one last hit, because Banded Talonflame is actually quite a bit of damage despite its base 86 attack stat. And I like how he kept pivoting into the Mega Blastoise to fire off Dark Pulses, because there was no resistances on Steve's team, so it's just bring in Blastoise, Dark Pulse, bring in Blastoise, Dark Pulse, get off this massive damage to pave the way for Weavile to possibly clean up at the end. He saw through some of the things Steve was trying to do, like the Cobra Berry on Slowbro. Granted, he didn't see the Drain Punch coming, but, you know, Drain Punch Slowbro. Being able to see that, you know, oh, it's definitely Cobra Berry, and then switching it out, and then bring in something that can easily take, like a Flamethrower, like the Mega Blastoise. And he didn't really have to make many big predictions this match. He held momentum through slow U-turn, and the planning is, you know, where the difference was. Like, you don't have to play amazingly and make super great predictions when you plan very well. You plan for scenarios and you can just carry them out in the match, and especially when you've got team matchup, you don't have to make these crazy predictions. You just play to the team matchup. And that's what he did. He played to the team matchup and was able to come out with a decent victory. And one thing I want to point out, I like the fact that he was doing calcs. You know, you can scout out sets. He saw that the Electivire was AV, so good job for that.
Miguel did a really good job this game of identifying his win cons early and identifying that while Blastoise could do a lot of damage, it wasn't necessarily a win condition, but, like he said, using it to pave the way for Weavile, which was his win condition, was a really good game plan. He realized how important hazards were for both teams because he wanted rocks up and played to that effectively. The big difference from last week is he has Weavile in against a Mon that he thinks he can kill, and he switches it out, whereas last week he let it take a bullet punch and die. And part of that is the difference of the team prep was a lot better. Like you said, it was fairly simple, fairly standard, but it doesn't matter because it was effective, it did everything it needed to, and that's all you need to do when you have the matchup in your favor, is just bring the simple, effective sets that you know are going to do work because they handle so much of your opponent's team.
So at number 9, we have the San Francisco Giants, so Geo, talk about him.
If you're gonna bring offensive Cresselia, at least bring Banded Fury Cutter.
That's the best set.
If you're gonna go with memes, just go like 110%.
That's bad advice.
It's terrible advice, don't listen to me. The prep scene.
Why do you even do this?
I don't know. For some reason, people thought that I'd be good at the game for some reason. Anyway.
Have they seen you play?
No one watches me. What are you talking about?
Ah, that's right.
The prep from Geo seemed rushed again. And by that I mean, in his team builder, literally half an hour before he battles, he's reconsidering moves. Which, we've all done it at times, but usually you want to go into a battle being confident in the team that you've brought, or at least, if you're not confident that it's the best team you could have brought going, I'm going to try and pull this off anyway. Like, if you're bringing a really stupid gimmick, then maybe it might not be the best team you could have built, but you think it's going to give you a big win, whatever. But you want to be confident in the team that you have, and he clearly wasn't, and with good reason, because that was a Zapdos set that couldn't touch Crocodile, and once Sam knew that, it was just such a momentum killer. He seemed to be really worried about Suicune in the prep, and I get that Suicune is Sam's only switch into Entei, but it's not like Suicune is the most terrifying one. I get Crocoon can be a problem as well, but he had enough things for it, I felt. And then early on he seemed a bit reluctant to switching Gramble into Crocodile, and I'm not 100% sure why, because Crocodile can't really do much to Gramble, and that Gramble could actually put a huge dent in Sam's team, and that's what we've been talking about in past weeks, people like Nick using wall breakers effectively. He did really well bluffing that Zapdos could actually do damage to Crocodile, so he brings it in, he knows that it walls Crook and that Sam is going to be scared of potential HP Ice.
I know the Cresselia was too passive last week, but I think he went a little bit too far on the other end of the spectrum, making it a little bit too offensive, but it's just not a strong hitter, and yeah, you can get a hit off, like on the Kyurem, but you didn't even kill. And then Kyurem can have Roost. So it's pretty much just a wasted set. He didn't get much out of it, and it just died. I do like the trick, though, because that can cripple something. And I still always like that Geo does his calcs pretty much every single turn. Really scout out what your opponent has, really scout out what your opponent can do to you. He did make some pretty good aggressive double plays, like Entei into Suicune, and I guess you pretty much said it all, except for I was surprised that Absol didn't spawn into that Draco Meteor. I know someone who thought it could. Apparently,
Absol is the best Draco switch-in ever. I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. I think it's specifically a Draco from a Latias switch-in.
I like for Latias. Anyway.
Yes. So my number 8 and your number 10, we have the Utah Jasmine. And this was a match.
Was it? I'm not sure.
This was definitely a match. I don't really know why he has Hydro over Surf. I guess, if it's, specially defensive Assault Vest Rhyperior, you can possibly take it out better than Surf, but you're risking the miss, which he did in match, so Hydro Miss is a thing, just like Focus Miss. If you don't have to run Focus Miss, don't run Focus Miss. The Gliscor set worked very well this week. I mean, it shut down literally Fizz's entire team. Fizz had nothing for it. And he had Spadef Clefable as his counter to Volcanion. That's just not going to happen. I mean, Volcanion just it hits so damn hard. You're never going to be able to counter it with anything like a Clefable, which is a good wall, but it's got kind of not great stats for a wall. He definitely made some misplays this match. When he's in with Empoleon on the Scizor, and he's saying, well, I expect him to expect Weezing to be the switch in to Mega Scizor, when you've got a Magnezone, which is a very common trapper of Mega Scizor. And then he goes for Superpower, and there goes your Magnezone, which you tried to trap the Mega Scizor with. So I felt like that was... it's hard to bring in a trapper on something you're trying to trap immediately, because generally, your opponents predict that and then kill it. Like, he played very safe with the Gliscor. He made sure to let it stay alive because, again, it did wall in, the entirety of Fizz's team, but he was playing so safe with it that he was actually getting timer stalled. So it didn't matter that he still had it around, because it was like, all of a sudden it's like 5-4, 5-3, and the timer's running out, and he's got to make some aggressive plays. And I like how in the middle of it, he's just like, oh, shit, there's 12 minutes left. I gotta start making some aggressive plays or I'm gonna lose because time runs out. Granted, at the end, he did get lucky with some of the timer stalling because, Fizz didn't timer stall. He kept Ice Beaming on the Hawlucha, even though your best chance to win was, roaring Hawlucha out into Volcanion and then letting that die to Rocks, which I like how he put up Rocks to make sure Volcanion couldn't switch in again, but you want to force a switch knowing that it is probably going to go to timeout and try to kill something that way. But it did work out for him that Fizz didn't actually go for the sub and went for high jump kick instead. So this was a game.
The Gliscor set, because Fizz wasn't particularly well prepared for it, basically just shut down the game. Like, Fizz had all this momentum early game, partly because of the Hydro Miss and getting huge damage off on Greninja, and then that just being eliminated as a threat. And then Gliscor comes in and just sits there. Fizz realizes he has nothing for it because he can't safely bring in Volcanion because rocks are up. He can't bring in Volcanion on any attacking move because it'll just die. And this Gliscor is just not dying and not really doing much to Fizz's team, and it's like both coaches are just sitting there going, well, there's no way out of this. And that's kind of just how the game ended up. It ended up with it going to timer because neither coach was able to play around Gliscor dying, which it just didn't. I don't really have too much else to say about this game.
Alright, so at number 7 we have the Pittsburgh Piratas, so go over Tup.
I'm not going to say too much about Tup because he obviously had a really rough week and his planning was pretty rushed. I think a lot of the sets were things that he'd brought to other matches that he could just bring again. And the biggest momentum change in this game, or the biggest momentum gainer for Chimp, was Tup getting caught off guard by Scarfed Politoed. And honestly, if you're not caught off guard by Scarfed Politoed, you're smoking something, because that is just a ridiculous set, and it worked. He just got out-prepped, and then there was a DC, so we don't get to see how he played the endgame. He probably would have lost it at that point, because the Politoed could basically get a kill every time it came in, and this Golipede could clean up. He knew his prep was off because of the time constraints, and he's going to address it next week, so I don't really have too much else to say.
I get being rushed this week. Tup had like you said, Tup had a really rough week, and I'm glad Tup and his family's okay. And life does come in the way sometimes, I understand that, so I'm not really going to harp on him being rushed. It just happens. Which I still want to say, Tup played well, even though he was really rushed. And it really changed his playstyle too. He played very, very aggressively to try to speed up the match. And some of the plays actually worked, like the confusion from the Hurricane and then hitting itself in confusion. He banked on that and it paid off for him, so, that's the thing. I think the biggest thing is, he brought offensive Tentacruel when defensive was just a better set. It's unfortunate that got crit, but, it's Pokemon. I'm sure this is going to be fixed next week because he's not going to be nearly as rushed for time. Alright, so at number 6, we have the Boston Red Sox. So, Nick, he didn't upload, unfortunately. That's what happens with bad internet. I don't really have much to say about him. He didn't have Hazard removal this week, which was going to cost him because, things on his team were weak to rocks, like the Kieran Black. And then, spikes too. His offense wasn't able to get him the momentum he needed in the beginning, especially around the hazards, because he has to think about what he switches in, because things are going to be taking hazard damage. He got out offense this week when he has a really offensive team. And that's just the thing about some of his mons, they're weak to hazards. He's got everything on the ground, so spikes and rocks just kind of screw him up. And when he doesn't have hazard removal, he just gives his opponent free reign to set all those hazards up. So I don't really know his thought process, so I can't really say what specifically was a misplay, what he did wrong in prep, because I don't know.
I have very little to add to that. I just want to ask Nick, I just want to know why you didn't bring Scar, what the thought process was behind it, because looking at Mono's team, I don't particularly understand the reason why, because you have other things to do with Mega Manetric, but that's all I'm going to say about Nick, because no upload. I'm going to talk about this match later because of Mono, so...
Alright, so at number 5, we have the Philadelphia Scissors. So, Chimp. I really like Chimp's planning this week. Shows how he can adjust his playstyle and plan to it. I think, though, in team planning, he underestimated Tup. And the reason I say that is because when he's talking about Celebi and how it gets Sucker Punch, and how I don't think Tup's ever going to be able to prepare for Sucker Punch on Celebi, like, not only did Tup really play when 4th gen was a big thing, but he also used Celebi for an entire season. So he knows what it can do. That just shows that he doesn't really look at his opponents and what they've done in the past. He just plans for the week, which, you know, it works. But at the same time, it's nice to be able to scout out, see, can this actually catch my opponent off guard? The chances are Sucker Punch on Celebi is not going to catch Tup off guard. And he brought some gimmicks to help deal with Excadrill, which kind of puts in work against his team. And he got caught off guard by Offensive Tentacruel. I see why he was, because, you know, you have a rain team, you'd expect your opponent to bring a Defensive Tentacruel. At the same time, again, like I said before, you need to scout out what your opponent does, because Tup has brought Offensive Tentacruel in the past. He made good doubles during the game, and Scarf Toad just put in quite a bit of work against Tup's team. I mean, Tup has a water weakness, and he played to that with a Scarf Politoad, which I never really thought would be a thing, but, you know.
It was a thing before. Geo brought it in Season 4, I believe, to kill Miguel's Victini.
Oh, that's right, he did. And he's able to use draft well, and I can see him continue to do well, because while I don't think his draft is very versatile, he's a very versatile player in terms of what playstyle he brings, and so he's using that to his advantage very well week to week.
So I get that he basically looked at Tup's team and went, wow, Excadrill and Mega Pidgeot are huge problems for my team. So he decides to do what we've been talking about a lot last week, is when you have a shit team matchup, that's when you bring gimmick sets, and he did it perfectly this week with Scarf Politoad. That has only ever been used as a gimmick set when you have a bad matchup, and at both times it has done what it needed to. So, really impressed about that. I don't have too much else to add because you covered everything pretty well. I just want to say, in the live comm, his head was obviously not in the right mindset. He was not thinking through plays very well and kept clicking a button and then going, oh, that wasn't my best play, and talking himself down and that kind of thing. And the two big things I think that affected that were doing a live comm instead of a post comm. I get the live comms, a lot of the showdown lives and that kind of thing, but GBA matches are really high pressure and are a lot more complicated than a showdown live generally, because you're dealing with potentially ridiculous sets that you would never even consider, whereas showdown you tend to know what people are bringing a bit more. The other thing is, he mentioned he hadn't eaten before the battle, and this is something that I've had a lot of experience with, is every time I haven't eaten a meal before I battle, like if I wake up in the morning and first thing I do is battle, I have lost. If I eat breakfast before I battle, I generally win, apart from like one or two times.
I mean, you lose because you're bad.
Yes, the whole 5 games I've lost in League format ever are because I'm bad.
Well, the other games that you won were because you're lucky. Hence, lucky and bad. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a little thing, but it's also puts you in a better mindset. Just to everyone out there, just don't skip breakfast. Breakfast is a very important meal. Never skip breakfast.
I skip breakfast.
You're the worst. Oh my god.
So my number 4, and your number 3, we have the Atlanta Holuchas. So, Fizz, talk about him.
Okay, so Fizz, he got some momentum early because he stays in with a Rhyperior against a Greninja. Like, he basically either predicted Cooper to overpredict and go for a U-turn or something, or just predicted the Hydro Miss straight up, which, like, you don't, because Surf would have just killed anyway. I don't really think that was a good play, but it paid off for him, so whatever. The big thing is, just check your mons. Like, people just need to check their mons. Why? Why is it so hard? He didn't prepare enough for Gliscor in the slightest, because every time that thing came in, he just had a really big problem with it. He had Ice Punch on Rhyperior, but Rhyperior gets outsped, doesn't have recovery, that kind of thing, so it can be dealt with. And then the end game was, I get it was a 50-50 kind of, with does Empoleon go for Roar, does it go for Ice Beam, that kind of thing. But High Jump Kick couldn't kill because Holucha is weak. And it was a bit of mind games that ended up not going in his favour. That your best chance was to hope that he went for Ice Beam again, or if he went for Roar, then you didn't get roared into Volcanion, which was 50-50. So that was just just strange.
I mean, he was throwing the match at the end to be a big you to Baby Nick and Brawlic for not believing him in previous weeks.
One of the big differences in Fizz's playing this week was the way he used Rhyperior. Previously, he's been really, really good with it in preserving it when it needs to, for what it needs to do, getting rocks up, getting off big damage. And then this week, he just kind of switches it in on things and is like, I don't really care if Rhyperior dies, and was really, really reckless with it. Get it? Because Rhyperior gets reckless.
I'm cutting that part out.
Damn it! That was like the best joke I made on ever. He did really well preserving Volcanion at 8 HP. Like, that is not enough HP to take any hit. I think that might have actually cost him a bit of momentum because he knew he had to keep Volcanion around, because otherwise he had nothing to kill Gliscor. It meant that every time Scylla came in, it had to defog rocks away. He couldn't switch in Volcanion on a lot of things, so he had to sack him on to be able to bring it in on the Gliscor. And it cost him a lot of momentum, and I would have preferred to see something else on his team with ice coverage for the Gliscor. You know, Mega Scizor gets Technician, just run Technician HBI Scizor. I have no idea how much damage that will do, but it'd be cool at least. And the last thing I'm going to say is,
Fizz, you barely planned for the Gliscor. I mean, not only did you only have Ice Punch on Rhyperior, the Volcanion didn't even outspeed. And it wasn't even like he was just running like max HP, max special attack. He didn't outspeed Gliscor by 2 points. Yeah, I mean, he needs to check his mons. It was poor planning, but aggressive playing plus some luck was how Fizz played this week. You know, those early game plays, like it was poor planning this week. And that's what happens when you don't plan well. It's very hard to maybe kill something, get a foothold in the match, and he needs to consider all the mons on his opponent's team, because it seemed like he planned for 10 mons, and then there was Gliscor. So hopefully in future weeks he picks up the prep again, because this was definitely a worse week for him. At number 3, and your number 2, the Tampa Bay lose weights, because that joke still is funny to me. Mono, get that shitty HP fighting out of there. It's HP Dragon. HP Dragon is much better. It does more damage. You should fucking know this by now. Overall, solid prep from Mono. It wasn't too much to say about it. You know, it's very offensive this week, much different than we saw last week, because he knows that if he tries to make a really bulky team, he's going to lose. It would have been a good plan to try to go more defensive, bulky offense. He needed to go much more hyper offensive with his team. Have like 1 or 2 walls in between just to kind of soak up some hits, set up hazards. But he needed fast offense. And once he saw Skarm, hazard stack. Yeah, that was his plan. Prep, and he played to it. Started with the Excelgor, set up spikes, set up rocks, and then just keep some momentum in your favor. Keep your opponent switching, so then he's just going to whittle himself down. He's using PZ very well to get offensive momentum, put a lot of offensive pressure, because Choice Specs Tri-Attack is not something that's easy to switch into. And he made the best play overall each turn. He knew what he needed to prevent. Like, he needed to prevent Gator from really setting up on him, so he has the Yachi Berry, Mandibuzz to foul play it. So, you know, it's those kind of plays that he knows setup can cost him the game. Say, like, for Alligator gets the +2. But he knows what he needs to do to prevent that from happening.
Hi from the next time. This is probably the best use of Paragon Z I've seen in League format, because it's one of those things that people know it's super powerful, but it's difficult to fit on a lot of teams, and it's a little bit too slow to be a really good late game cleaner, and people just tend to veer away from it, and the fact that he's got it and he's using it really, really well is good to see. One thing he did really, really well this match was identifying what each mon's purpose was in the game. So Excelgor is meant to get up spikes, and so he gets up spikes, and then he basically has it around as death fodder. Paragon Z, he looks at what's left of Nick's team and says, I just need this to kill the Venusaur, so just switches it in on Venusaur, because it doesn't matter what Venusaur goes for, it'll live a hit, and then can just fire up the Specs Tri-Attack and really weaken that Venusaur, and end up just killing it. And basically, he played really well around Nick's wall breakers and Nick's offense by bringing an equally offensive team. He just out-nicked Nick, because Nick normally brings these teams which are 3 wall breakers, 2 pivots or things, utility things like Mega Venus or Skarm, for example, and then either a Scarfer or Jolteon or something like that to clean up. And then we see Mono's team is wall breakers, Mega Manectric to clean up, and then the things to get rid of hazards, set up hazards, and deal with setup sweepers as like the 2 bulky mons. And the reason that worked so well is because when you bring wall breakers and Nick doesn't bring Skarmory, then pretty much every time you bring in something that outspeeds whatever Nick has out, he's forced to sack something, and that puts the matchup in your favor again. I mean, Mono's prep was it was pretty simple, efficient. He didn't bring anything really out there, he just knew what he had to do and executed it really, really well, and that's what Mono just does really well every time.
Except for taking down Air Balloon, Rock Polish, Cobalion.
Well, yeah, but Evelyn Rock Polish Cobalion is just like an absolute lord set that just beats everyone.
It just beats Mono.
Yeah, it just beats Mono.
So at number 2, I have the San Francisco Arcanines. You have a number 4. You can talk about George.
He brought Reflect-type Latias again, which, you know, it can do work. It's a good set. But the problem I had with it was he intended to Reflect-type into Bug Steel because it's a good typing, because then Latias is really hard to kill. But he doesn't have something like Calm Mind to make it, you know, if it's hard to kill and you become a really good typing and then you start setting up Calm Minds, then you pretty much just win. Instead, he's just got Draco Meteor as your only attack, which in itself isn't bad, but the problem is, if you sit there and Reflect type on a Sizzle, and it can just set up in your face, like if it's a bulky SD set, it can take Dracos pretty comfortably and just set up Swords Dances, and then you're in big trouble, because Sizzle getting set up is just bad, because it can also Baton Pass into something else. The HP Fire Fortress, that's the kind of thing that no one can predict. You can predict it to have HP Fire maybe, but Max Special Attack, Custat Berry, was just the perfect set for what it needed to do this game. The Mega Alakazam proved to be a pretty big problem for George. He managed to play around it, and had things like Sucker Punch on Nidoqueen to try and deal with it, but he didn't have much in prep for it. But this is the thing with George, is he often brings prep that is really, really specific to a particular mon, and that ends up not paying off, like the Melodic this week. But he manages to play around these things really well, despite not having an answer built into his team. And so then, because he's a really good player, he maneuvers himself into a position to win despite not having the most optimum prep, in my opinion. He made some misplays and some really good plays. It's the same as Lars. They had a really back and forth game. Both of them got some predictions right and some predictions wrong. And that is basically why it came down to a 50-50, because when 2 people are playing that well against each other, it's going to come down to a roll or a crit or something, because that's just how Pokemon works.
Well, the thing is, like, I think George could have ended this game a lot quicker. And that mostly comes around the misplays with Infernape. He has a Choice Band in Infernape, and I know how much damage Choice Band in Infernape can do, because it is one of my favorite Infernape sets in League format. When you see that your opponent has literally no resistance, or nothing that can sponge a hit from Infernape, because I know there was still Crawdaunt around, and to be honest, Crawdaunt, not the bulkiest thing in the world, and you are a Choice Band in Infernape. Click Flare Blitz. You don't have to pivot around when your opponent doesn't have a switch into something. So I think he has to think about, do my opponents have switch-ins for my wall breakers? If not, click the thing that wall breaks. So, and then like towards the end, I think it was a better roll to kill with Sucker Punch than it was to live in Earth Power. And I know he said he got caught up in the heat of the moment and went for the Ice Punch instead. But, you know, the overall best play was just to go for the Sucker Punch, and he's reducing his chances of winning by not going for it. So, I mean, overall, it was a really, like, don't get me wrong, it was a really good match, and I think he played well. It was definitely that misplay right in the middle with the Infernape that cost him so much momentum. So, at number 1, for both of us, we had the San Diego Chimchards, which I know is probably very surprising to some of you, because apparently, all of you think I hate Envy, and I don't understand. Like, I honestly don't understand. But, you know, whatever. Talk about Envy.
He got his set predictions right this week. Like, it was insane watching his team builder, and he goes, I'm bringing Yachi Berry Gyarados because I'm expecting Freeze Dry. Sure, it's not the most outlandish thing, but Mamoswine does get other moves to deal with Gyarados, and he called it right. His use of Wobbuffet and then Smash Pass is pretty much the only way I can see Smash Pass working in League format, because Wobbuffet, people have to bring Toxic on Mons or something like that for it, and you can Encore them into that and then Smash Pass in their face. And that was really well done because he didn't intend to go into Gyarados. He knew Gyarados was a win condition until he saw the Protect on Sylveon and went, well, now I can just get a free switch and just clean up. He continues to use really offensive sets really, really well. He basically has 1 or 2 pivots or support mons, and then just everything else is straight up offense. Like something like a Mega Ampharos, which is traditionally a bulky pivot mon that, a slow wall breaker that can take a couple of hits and just fire off powerful thunderbolts. He's using agility and Iron Tail because he is really, really good at setting up and sweeping, and so he brings a lot of setup sweepers so that he can capitalize on any mistake the opponent makes. One really good thing about MV is even in the early stages of the game, he has sight of the late game. A lot of people will play the early game and then only when they get to about the middle will start looking at what they need to clean up late game, but he knew he had to get rid of rocks to keep Gyarados as healthy as possible because combination of Ice Shard, potentially having to take a hit from Mega Aerodactyl because it could start speed and that kind of thing. He wanted to keep it as healthy as possible, so just got rocks away so he could bring it in safely. And there's not much else to say. His prep was on point, even if Tom had made the right play and gone for Hyper Voice and then taken out the Ampharos. MV had other ways to win, notably the Gyarados, and it would have been, like I said before, a much more interesting game, a much more back and forth game. It was by no means wrapped up at that point, but MV still had ways to win, so I'm just going to say that it was a 70-30-ish play. It was either MV wins there or he doesn't win there, and he won there.
Yeah, MV planning is on point, like always. And he predicted the early game well to get the rocks up and then spin away the rocks. He knew that getting rid of rocks was probably the most important thing he could have done. He really tried to shell smash, I think, a little bit too early, because I can't really fault him for going for the shell smash and then trying to baton pass out, because he had set it up. Might as well try to punch a hole, which I know he likes doing with Shell Smash. Shell Smash, punch a hole, bring in something else to set up, which he does really well. Like, his ability to use 2 setup mons in conjunction, one to set up and punch holes, and then the other one to set up and sweep at the end, is, I would say, the best in the league. So that is going to wrap up the Week 6 power rankings for the GBA Season 6. If you have your own power rankings, please leave them down in the comments section below. Do you have anything else to say, Trav?
Mono is trash.
That's good enough for me. That is it for the power rankings. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye.